welcome to this very special discussion. The subject today is an intriguing one, but I would say a very perceptive one as well. In the context of India, Pakistan, America, we're talking about the question of trust. And if you think about it, trust bedevils that relationship, whether you're talking about India and Pakistan, whether you're talking about India and America, or whether you're talking about Pakistan and America. It's no great secret that the biggest element of problem in our relationship with our neighbor is that we probably don't trust each other. There are good historical reasons. Unfortunately, there are also several more contemporary political reasons. But trust also has bedeviled the nature of our relationship with the Americans, both in terms of how we perceive them, and much more importantly, in terms of how we understand what they say and what they plan to do. And much as the Pakistani government may feel close to the Americans, the Pakistani people have their enormous reservoir of distrust of Washington. So trust, in a sense, vitiates this triangular relationship, and in a sense, therefore, trust is the issue that needs to be addressed if this relationship is going to escape from the problems that it's been through historically. My guests are Manish Tiwari, former Minister of Information and Broadcasting and a very distinguished Supreme Court lawyer in his own right; Mr. Abdul Basit, the Pakistan High Commissioner, very welcome to us this morning, sir; and Mr. Seshadri Chari, former editor of The Organizer and a member of the BJP National Executive. Let me, in a sense, start with you, Mr. Tiwari. Most Indians are distrustful of Pakistan. But can you be honest and say that a very large element of that distrust is either based on prejudice or perhaps ignorance?
What I was saying is that both those maxims are not exclusive to each other. The reality is that there is a level of distrust, between the establishments, to some extent between the people also. Whether that is entirely based upon ignorance or it's based upon certain innuendo is really a matter of conjecture, because India-Pakistan relations over the last 6 decades have not been a Shangri-La of bliss. There are problems of history, there are problems of geography, and so therefore if we really need to start rebuilding the trust quotient, the first thing that we need to do is to be absolutely candid and upfront with each other. And candor and being upfront requires an acknowledgement, or at least an honest conversation on some of the problems which bedevil the relationship. Unfortunately, what's really been happening is that we have been talking at each other rather than seriously trying to talk to each other. So therefore, if at all you have to start making the beginning of re-establishing the trust quotient, you first need to start seriously talking to each other.
High Commissioner, you've been in Delhi long enough to sense we distrust your country. What we've never asked you is how much do you distrust us? Honestly, tell me, Pakistanis must have the same sense of distrust, the same sense of disillusionment, perhaps even disenchantment with India. Express it to us and explain it. Let us hear it for the first time.
Thank you very much. This trust issue, reminds me of a couplet by Faiz Ahmad Faiz, that हम के ठहरे अजनबी इतनी मदारातों के बाद फिर बनेंगे आशना कितनी मुलाकातों के बाद. Now, no doubt, as you very rightly mentioned, that there are historical reasons for this mistrust between our two countries, I would say at all levels. And the primary reason from our perspective is the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. I think if we had been able to resolve that dispute right in the beginning, we would not have seen that level of mistrust which exists today. We have fought wars over that dispute, and that, in my view, continues to be the major bone of contention. Then, because of that dispute and because of the wars we fought, we added many more issues to our bilateral relationship, including Siachen, Sar Creek, so much so that we have not been able to ease travel restrictions between our two countries. So this is, the trust or the mistrust is kind of increasing. And unless we get to the bottom of the core issues, our fear in Pakistan is that we would not be able to resolve our bilateral, the mistrust issue or bridge the gap between our two countries, or to address other important issues which are kind of, bedeviling our region, and we need to really work very hard. I would agree with Mr. Tiwari that we need to really, have a dialogue process which really addresses the issues at hand, rather than talking for the sake of talking would not really do any good. So if we were to address our problems or bridge the gap, the trust gap, we need to work very, very hard, sincerely, genuinely, in order to come together and address the issues which both our countries face and the region faces as a whole.
Mr. Chari, for most Indians, at the core of this distrust that we feel towards Pakistan lies our belief that they are not responsive to the terror that we face, which we believe emanates. How much does that retrieve the situation in your eyes? Or are you still distrustful of the news, and do you still question whether this is a ban? Because there are elements of questioning in the reportage this morning which weren't there yesterday when the news first broke.
No, Karan, I think, it's not the issue of just India and Pakistan. I think if I'm not wrong, we are talking in terms of the triangle, India, Pakistan, US. And if you go by the rules of the game of Bollywood in the 60s and 70s, all love triangles, in all the love triangle films, the first casualty was always the trust. So if you go by that rule, I think it is probably easy for building the trust deficit between India and Pakistan. It's very difficult to build the trust deficit between US and Pakistan. And as far as your question about the ban on these organizations are concerned, there are conflicting reports. I think only the bank accounts have been seized, and they have been made inoperative.
Can I interrupt you at that point?
But what is happening?
Ask the High Commissioner to clarify.
Yeah, but what is happening here is, when we are talking of 100 confidence building measures, we are talking of only one. And if that one issue is to be resolved once and for all, things will be different. And as far as the trust deficit beginning from Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, I think it's an old issue. What is more important is the trust deficit between India and Pakistan in giving India its due role in Afghanistan, in tackling non-state actors in Pakistan, in tackling Tehreek-e-Taliban, which is fighting the Pakistan army. So these are all larger issues.
Can I stop you for a moment, Mr. Chari?
Small issue.
Mr. Chari, let me stop you for a moment. Let me ask the High Commissioner a question about the exact status of Jamaat-ul-Dawa and Falah-e-Insaniyat. Are they banned, or is it only the bank accounts that are frozen? Yesterday, the news suggested they were banned. Today, as a result of reporters and correspondents doing their own investigation, there is doubt that's crept in. So tell me, what is the exact status today?
We are proceeding strictly in accordance with UN resolution. I think it is 1267, if I'm not wrong. And Jamaat's bank accounts have been frozen, and there is a ban on the travel abroad of its leadership. So we are moving in accordance with whatever is required under that resolution. And I do not see as much else needs to be done. As far as if you are referring to Hafiz Saeed as to why he has not been put behind bars, I will remind you and the audience that the resolution itself doesn't warrant or require on the part of its member states to lock up such individuals. So we are proceeding against the organization as required under the relevant UN resolution.
I'll tell you why I asked the question, High Commissioner. The statement issued by your Interior Ministry listed 10 new organizations that had been added to the list of banned entities, And that includes not just the JUD and the Falah Insaniyat, it also interestingly includes the Harkat-e-Mujahideen. But the news that has subsequently broken is that only bank accounts are frozen and there are travel restrictions. So is it actually on that list of banned entities? Because if it is, then in addition to bank accounts being frozen and travel restrictions, it will also now be a banned organization. That's why I asked for clarity. Is it on that list of 10 that have been submitted?
As I said, we are proceeding strictly in accordance with whatever is required under that resolution, and action is being taken. So there are no two views about it, that Pakistan is now moving ahead without any distinction when it comes to terrorism.
You're a desk diplomat, sir. You've sidestepped my question very adroitly, and I compliment you. But when you say we are proceeding, in answer to my question, is this a banned entity? My interpretation of your answer is it's not a banned entity, but maybe as you proceed, it may become one in due course.
Look, we are a responsible member of the international community, and we understand our responsibilities, our obligations, and we are proceeding, as I said earlier, and we would not take advantage of any lacuna if there exists one in the UN resolution. So we are proceeding against all organizations which come within the purview of that UN resolution.
All right. Manish Tiwari, the critical question, and this is where I want to bring in America into our equation and discussion, as Pakistan proceeds down that road, and I'm still not sure in my own mind whether that means it is already the JUD, a banned entity, or it will become one in due course. But as it proceeds down that road, do you believe it's doing so of its own volition? Or is it being pushed, nudged, and coerced by Washington? Because remember, just a few days ago, Secretary of State Kerry was in Pakistan, publicly advocating stricter treatment of organizations, one of which he named was the ADT, and publicly saying that you can't have good and bad terrorists. So is this happening voluntarily, or is it happening under American advice, coercion, pressure, choose whatever verb you want?
Karun, I know that you hate your guests digressing from your questions, but may I pick up on something which the High Commissioner had said? You know, he alluded to Jammu and Kashmir being the fundamental issue between India and Pakistan. I do not know how much of that is true. What your Pakistani interlocutors privately tell you, and I do not expect the High Commissioner to confirm it, is that the real problem is the liberation of Bangladesh. After the liberation of Bangladesh, the Pakistani establishment considered India to be an existential threat, and then they unleashed this proxy war of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts. So therefore, till that point in time, the Pakistani establishment does not make that leap of faith where they are able to mentally reconcile to the fact that if Bangladesh went away or East Pakistan went away, it was because of their mistakes and not because of India. You will not see this cross-border terrorism stop. And that leads you into your second question as to whether these entities are being proscribed on the coercion or the pressure of Washington, D.C., or Pakistan is doing it voluntarily. I think, you see, these are three different equations altogether. The India-Pakistan equation, the Indo-US equation, and the Pakistani-US equation. So if we expect the United States of America to really do the heavy lifting on our part, to see that Pakistan starts behaving in a uniform manner on both its eastern and western borders, we are living in a fool's paradise. The fact is that over all these years, while they've allowed drone attacks into the tribal agencies, they have been patronizing the Jamaat-ul-Dawa, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and all the Punjab-based terrorist groups which have been sponsoring the terrorism into Punjab, into India. And this has been going on for the last 3 decades. It started with Punjab, spread to Kashmir, and spread to the rest of the country. And after the Peshawar massacre, if still the Pakistani establishment does not wake up and realize that the Frankensteins have come home to bite, I'm sorry, they are really up a creek without a paddle. And insofar as we are concerned, we'll have to do the heavy lifting on our own part and not expect Washington, D.C. to pull our chestnuts out of the fire, because ultimately the reality of Bangladesh's liberation cannot be undone. And that's the mental block which the Pakistani establishment has.
After 6 years of India's requests and demands being ignored, suddenly at a particular moment when Obama is coming to India and the Secretary of State comes before him, these things begin to happen. Is that a sign that in fact America is nudging, because America is conscious, A, of the need to tackle terror, B, of the distrust between the two countries, and is therefore playing a helping hand? And I'm deliberately bringing in the Americans because it seems to me that is one explanation. To what extent do you agree with it? To what extent do you disagree with it?
No, the question is not bringing in the Americans deliberately. The Americans have come in now. Of course, it's very important for the Indian establishment to point out the chinks in the security armor. Not only that, it has been pointed out to the world community time and again as to these elements within the Pakistani establishment which thrive not because of any external support but mainly because of the internal support. The one very important element here is, if you allow me to draw a little bit of an analogy, Pakistan suffers from a very strange syndrome of what we call the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde syndrome. They still suffer from that. They created a portion in 1948, 50s and 60s, especially during Zia's regime, when the radical elements were introduced, the idea of radicalism was introduced. And Pakistan deliberately decided to consume this portion and become Mr. Hyde. And if you know the end of that story, finally Mr. Hyde writes a letter, and the choice that Dr. Jekyll gave to Mr. Hyde is either you get caught and get punished for all the acts that you have done, or commit suicide. And if Mr. Hyde dies, which is what happens in the end, he didn't die alone. He took Dr. Jekyll with him. I think Pakistan has to stop somewhere and reflect. Why do they need the UK and the US as a jury to tell them that you have to pull up the socks and fight the terrorists? Why do they need to do that? I would rather appeal to the High Commissioner that it is better to create confidence building measures between India and Pakistan rather than wait for the UK and the USA to tell Pakistan what they are supposed to do with their own terrorists.
High Commissioner, you're very much in the dock at the moment, and I promise you that I will reverse the situation equally effectively in a moment's time. But I want first, while you are in the dock, to ask you two questions. Can you clarify on that news report by PTI, which has come twice, that in fact Pakistan has been approached jointly by America and by Britain to either hand over Zaki or Rahman Lakvi to India so he can face trial in this country, or to one of them, because their citizens too were killed in 2008, so that he can face justice either in London or Washington? Can you confirm that report, deny it, add to it, whatever you want?
That is incorrect.
It is incorrect?
Yes.
There has been no such request whatsoever?
No.
Okay. That's not something you're proceeding down the road, to use your memorable phrase which you used earlier.
No, this is incorrect.
Thank you.
PTI.
The second question, I'm picking up on the point made by Manish Tiwari. To what extent does 1971 and the role played by the Indian Army and the Indian government in what we call the liberation of Bangladesh, which you certainly call the division and partition of your country, to what extent does that rankle, to what extent does that lie behind, perhaps deep and subterraneously, the attitude that Pakistan and your government have of us and our country?
From our perspective, Karan, the 1971 and the creation of Bangladesh also happened because of the mistrust between our two countries. And the reason I would say again, with due respect, that the core issue continues to be Jammu and Kashmir. Terrorism, the issue of terrorism, you would appreciate that Pakistan is also one of the major victims of this menace. And no country has suffered more than Pakistan at the hands of terrorism. So as far as Pakistan is concerned, we strongly believe that both our countries need to really work together to resolve this issue. Having said that, when you talk about terrorism in Pakistan, we have betting and encouraging terrorism in the Fatah region, in Balochistan. So there are issues, on which are of mutual concern to both Pakistan and India. So what I would say here is that we need to sit together, address all these issues, and I fully understand that India at the moment is not ready for a dialogue process. So be it. We also are not in a hurry. We will give India some time. Whenever they are ready, we are willing to talk to India. But at the same time, we would not ask for a talk process or for a dialogue process for the sake of talking to each other. So whenever India is prepared to talk to us, we will respond positively.
A quick reminder of my original question, High Commissioner. You sidestepped Bangladesh. Does it rankle? Is it forgotten? Is it in the past? Is it still a motive for what happens today?
I think we cannot live in the past. We need to move on. Bangladesh is now a sovereign country. They made their decision, and we have very strong brotherly relations with Bangladesh. So that is no more, a kind of reference point for us. And we have moved on since then.
And these extraneous elements that you referred to a moment ago, who have a role to play in Balochistan and parts of your northwest frontier province, are those extraneous elements Indian? Are those extraneous elements Indian? Were you referring to Indian intervention in Balochistan in diplomatic terminology?
No, I think there have been a talk about this, and we would, and we hope that when President Obama comes here, we hope that would result in further strengthening bilateral relations between U.S. and India. It would also inject some stability into this region, would help contribute towards injecting some stability into this region as well.
When you look at the Samjhauta situation and its handling by India, the fact that it's dragged on, the fact that the accused have changed and been replaced, the fact that Seema Anand was given bail but not released, what's the great difference between our accusations that they're dragging their feet over 2008 and their accusation that they're doing precisely the same with Samjhauta?
Karan, first of all, in India's case, with regard to cross-border terrorism, the evidence is voluminous, it's empirical, and it goes back 35 years. It is not episodical, only contained to the 26/11 incident. The other distinction is that if in 26/11, Kasab wouldn't have been caught and his credentials wouldn't have been established, Pakistan would have denied its involvement in the attack. So therefore, if there was an acknowledgement by the Pakistani establishment that non-state actors or rogue elements were responsible for it, it is only because Kasab got caught. The distinction with the Samjhauta case is, Samjhauta's investigation was not initiated at the instance, coercion or pressure of any other country. It was an investigation which was initiated by the Indian establishment. Subsequently, when the investigation got handed over to the National Investigation Agency, they may have come to a separate set of conclusions. And in a criminal investigation, it often happens that a particular agency may come to a certain set of conclusions, another agency may come to a diametrically opposite set of conclusions. But the distinction between Samjhauta and 26/11 is that the 26/11 investigation was initiated suo moto by the Indian establishment. In the case of 26/11, I'm afraid if Kasab would not have been caught alive, there would have been a blanket denial of Pakistan's involvement.